The maintenance tunnel smelled like recycled air and burnt insulation, a combination that Hannah had long since stopped noticing. She wedged herself deeper into the narrow access shaft, her headlamp cutting through the darkness as she reached for the malfunctioning coolant valve. Above her, somewhere on the gleaming upper decks of the Coalition starship Meridian Dawn, officers from 24 different species were probably enjoying their evening meal in the Grand Commissary. Down here, 3 decks below the bilge level, it was just Hannah and the mechanical guts of the ship. The valve finally gave way with a hiss and a spray of blue fluid that splattered across her uniform. Hannah sighed, wiping the coolant from her face with the back of her gloved hand. Nobody would see the stain anyway. In her 6 months aboard the Meridian Dawn, she could count on one hand the number of senior officers who had actually looked at her long enough to recognize her face. Hannah pulled herself backwards through the tunnel, her shoulders scraping against the metal walls. The ship was massive, nearly 2 kilometers from bow to stern, home to 800 crew members from the Coalition of United Systems. It was a marvel of cooperative engineering, with Kryn metalworking, Chitara computational systems, and human practical design all woven together. Beautiful, really, when Hannah stopped to think about it. She emerged from the access hatch into a slightly larger corridor, where her colleague Taman was waiting with a toolkit and a sympathetic expression. He was reading something on his data pad, his dark hair falling across his forehead as he looked up. Let me guess, the valve was installed backwards again. 3rd time this month, Hannah said, peeling off her gloves. I swear the Chitara engineers design these systems without ever considering that someone actually has to maintain them. Taman chuckled and offered her a cleaning cloth. That's because they have very different anatomy. Commander Thulos probably thinks these spaces are perfectly reasonable. He's never tried to fit his thorax in there. Hannah wiped the worst of the coolant from her face and neck. At 28, she had already spent 5 years working maintenance on various Coalition vessels. Her official title was Environmental Systems Technician 3rd Class, which was a fancy way of saying she fixed whatever broke in the parts of the ship that nobody else wanted to crawl into. Air recyclers, waste management, coolant systems, backup power conduits, the invisible infrastructure that kept everyone alive. Did you finish the atmospheric scrubber in Section 7? Taman asked as they walked together toward the maintenance depot. 2 hours ago. It's running at 98% efficiency now. Better than factory spec. Hannah couldn't keep the note of pride from her voice, even though she knew the chief engineer would probably never notice. The problem was a carbon buildup in the filter assembly. Simple fix if you know where to look. They passed a group of Kryn security officers, tall reptilian beings with scales that shimmered under the corridor lights. The aliens didn't even glance at the 2 humans in maintenance coveralls. Hannah had gotten used to it. Humans were common in the Coalition, especially in technical and support roles, but they weren't particularly impressive compared to species with natural armor, compound sensory organs, or the ability to survive in vacuum for short periods. The maintenance depot was a cramped room filled with spare parts, diagnostic equipment, and the faint smell of synthetic lubricant. Hannah logged her completed work on the terminal, while Taman organized tools for tomorrow's shift. The quiet routine was comfortable, familiar. You ever think about transferring? Taman asked suddenly. Maybe to a position with better visibility. You're good enough to be an engineering supervisor. Hannah shrugged. Who's going to recommend me? Chief Engineer Croth doesn't even know my name. To him, I'm just the human in maintenance. That's their loss. Taman's voice held genuine frustration. You know this ship better than anyone. You've been inside systems that half the engineers don't even realize exist. It was true. Over 6 months of crawling through access tunnels and maintenance shafts, Hannah had developed an almost intimate knowledge of the Meridian Dawn's infrastructure. She knew where the emergency bypass conduits ran, which power junctions had redundancies, and how to access critical systems through routes that weren't on any official schematic. It was the kind of knowledge you only gained by doing the unglamorous work that kept a ship alive. But knowledge without recognition didn't lead anywhere. Hannah had made peace with that. The ship's communication system crackled to life overhead. All hands, this is the bridge. We will be conducting a course correction in 30 minutes as we approach the Helix Nebula border. Diplomatic mission parameters remain unchanged. Captain Vexthar sends his compliments to all crew for their excellent performance this cycle. Taman rolled his eyes. Diplomatic mission. You think they'll actually achieve anything useful? Not our department. Hana said, though she followed galactic politics more closely than she let on. The Helix Nebula region had been contested territory for months, with the aggressive faction known as the Ravagers making increasingly bold incursions into Coalition space. The Meridian Dawn was carrying ambassadors to a neutral station for peace talks, a mission that most of the crew considered optimistic at best. Hana finished her reports and secured her equipment locker. I'm going to grab some food and then sleep for 10 hours. That coolant valve nearly dislocated my shoulder. Same, the human quarters are having movie night. In the common room if you're interested. Maybe. If I can keep my eyes open that long. They left the depot together. 2 more maintenance workers at the end of a long shift. The corridors were quieter now, with most of the day cycle crew either at their posts or relaxing in their quarters. Hana passed the large windows that looked out into space, where stars drifted by in the familiar patterns of Coalition-controlled territory. Out there, somewhere beyond the glass and the void, was Earth, the world she'd left behind to work among the stars. She didn't regret the choice. Earth was crowded, limited. Out here, even as an overlooked technician, she was part of something larger. The Coalition represented the dream of species working together, of peace maintained through cooperation rather than conquest. The Meridian Dawn herself was a symbol of that dream, a vessel where Kryn, Chitara, humans, and a dozen other species served side by side. In the human quarters, Hana showered off the remaining coolant and changed into clean clothes. The small cabin she shared with 3 other human crew members was empty, her roommates still on their shifts. She sat on her bunk and pulled out her personal data pad, skimming through messages from home. Her sister had sent pictures of her niece's birthday party. Her father wanted to know when she'd be back in Earth orbit for leave. Hana sent quick replies promising to visit when the mission cycle ended, then set the data pad aside. Through the thin walls she could hear someone watching a video, the muffled sounds of an action movie filtering through. The hum of the ship's systems was a constant background noise, so familiar now that silence would have seemed strange. She lay back on her bunk, staring at the ceiling. In a few hours she'd wake up and do it all again. Fix another broken valve, clean another filter, crawl through another maintenance tunnel that no one else wanted to enter. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't heroic, but it was necessary, and Hana took pride in doing it well. The ship shuddered slightly as the course correction began, engines adjusting their thrust to change trajectory. Hana barely noticed. She'd felt that particular vibration 100 times before. She closed her eyes and let the familiar rhythm of the Meridian Dawn lull her toward sleep, completely unaware that in less than 12 hours, everything she knew would shatter. The invisible maintenance technician who fixed valves and cleaned filters was about to face a test that would either break her or transform her into something the galaxy had never expected. But for now, Hana was just tired, and in the warm cocoon of her bunk with the ship humming around her, that was enough. The emergency klaxon shrieked through the corridors like a wounded animal, dragging Hana from deep sleep into confused terror. She rolled off her bunk, instinct overriding the fog of exhaustion, and hit the floor just as the first explosion rocked the ship. The Meridian Dawn lurched violently to starboard. Equipment crashed from shelves. The lights flickered, died, then came back on in emergency red. Somewhere close by, someone was screaming. Hana's mind raced through possibilities even as she scrambled for her emergency locker. Collision, engine failure, structural compromise. The klaxon pattern was specific. 3 long bursts, 2 short. She'd heard it in drills, but never in reality. Combat alert. The ship shuddered again, and this time Hana felt the impact through the deck plating. Not an internal explosion. Something hitting them from outside. The walls groaned with stress, metal protesting forces it wasn't designed to withstand. She pulled on her emergency suit with shaking hands, the thin but durable material designed to maintain pressure in case of hull breach. Around her, her roommates were doing the same, their faces pale in the red emergency lighting. Nobody spoke. The klaxon made conversation impossible anyway. The communication system crackled, then cleared enough for a voice to cut through. Captain Vexthar, his normally measured tone sharp with urgency. All hands to combat stations. We are under attack by unknown hostile forces. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill. Engineering teams to damage control. Security teams to defensive positions. All non-essential personnel to emergency shelters immediately. Another impact, harder this time. The deck tilted at a sickening angle before the gravity stabilizers compensated. Hana grabbed the doorframe to steady herself and activated her comm unit. Maintenance 3 reporting. Where do you need us? Her voice came out steadier than she felt. Static, then Taemin's voice, strained but functional. Hana, thank the stars. I'm in Engineering Bay 2. We've got fires on decks 5 through 7 and the primary coolant system just went critical. I need everyone who knows these systems down here now. On my way. Hana pushed into the corridor, joining a chaotic stream of crew members rushing toward their assigned stations. A Chitara engineer scrambled past on 6 legs, mandibles clicking in distress. 2 Kryn security officers ran the opposite direction, plasma rifles at the ready. The ship shook again, and somewhere above them, the terrible sound of tearing metal echoed through the superstructure. The lift system was offline, forcing Hana to use the emergency ladders. She descended 3 levels, her hands sliding on the rungs as the ship continued to buck and shudder. Smoke was beginning to seep through the ventilation system. She could smell burning plastic and ozone. Engineering Bay 2 was chaos. Sparks cascaded from damaged control panels. 3 crew members fought a blaze in the corner with chemical extinguishers. Taemin stood at the main console, his hands flying over the controls while sweat poured down his face. Status! Hana barked, falling into the crisis protocol they'd drilled countless times. Ravagers, Taemin said without looking up. 3 ships. They hit us coming out of jump, caught us completely flat. The bridge took a direct hit. Captain Vexthar is alive but wounded. Commander Thulos is coordinating from auxiliary control. Hana's stomach dropped. The bridge. The command crew. The people who were supposed to know what to do in situations exactly like this. How bad? Bad enough that they're asking maintenance technicians for help. Taemin finally looked at her, and Hana saw fear beneath the focus. We've got 17 confirmed hull breaches. Life support is failing in 4 sections. The main reactor is holding, but 2 secondary power grids are completely gone, and that's just what we know about. Half our sensor grid is offline. Hana moved to a secondary console and pulled up the ship's schematic. The damage display was a constellation of red warning indicators. The Meridian Dawn was dying around them, and she could feel it. The ship's vibrations had changed. The healthy hum of operating systems had given way to grinding, struggling sounds. Where do you need me? Before Taemin could answer, the communication system shrieked with static. Then a new voice cut through. Harsh, mechanical, translated through the Coalition's universal language protocols. Coalition vessel Meridian Dawn, you are defeated. Shut down all remaining systems and prepare to be boarded. Resistance will be met with immediate execution of all crew. The Ravagers. Hana had never heard their actual voices before. Most encounters with them ended in total destruction. No survivors to report back. These raiders had terrorized the border regions for months, appearing without warning, overwhelming their targets with savage efficiency, then vanishing back into uncharted space. Commander Thulos responded, his Chitara clicking partially untranslated in his stress. This is Commander Thulos of the Coalition starship Meridian Dawn. We are a diplomatic vessel operating under the Galactic Accords. Any attack on this ship is a violation of your laws mean nothing here, insect. You have 5 minutes to comply. The channel went dead. Taemin and Hana locked eyes. Around them, the engineering crew had frozen, looking to them for guidance that neither of them was qualified to give. Options? Hana asked quietly. We can't fight them. Our weapon systems are mostly offline, and even if they weren't, we're outgunned. Surrender might be the only way to save lives. You believe that? Taemin hesitated. No, the Ravagers don't take prisoners. Everyone knows that. Another explosion rocked the ship, closer this time. The lights dimmed further. On the schematic display, another section flickered red as atmosphere vented into space. Hana's mind raced. 800 crew members, dozens of species, scientists, diplomats, engineers, families, all of them depending on officers who were dead or incapacitated, on weapon systems that weren't responding, on shields that had already failed. The maintenance tunnels, she said suddenly. Taemin frowned. What? The maintenance tunnel network. It runs through the entire ship, accessing every major system. The Ravagers won't know about them. They're not on the main schematics because they're not ship's architecture. They're human add-ons. Hana were maintenance technicians, not soldiers. I know. She pulled up the access tunnel map on her console. The familiar pathways she'd crawled through for 6 months, suddenly looking like something else entirely. But I also know this ship better than anyone. I know where every power junction is, every life support hub, every emergency system. If the Ravagers board us, they'll take the main corridors and secure the obvious strategic points. But there's a whole ship beneath the ship that they won't even know exists. Taman stared at her. You're talking about guerrilla resistance. We're not trained for that. We're not trained to die quietly either. The communication system crackled again. 3 minutes, Coalition vessel. Around them, the other crew members were listening now. A young Kryn technician barely past adolescence. 2 human engineers who Hana recognized from the day shift. A elderly Chitara, who had served in the Coalition fleet for 30 years. All of them looking at her with desperate hope. Hana made a decision that wasn't really hers to make. Anyone who wants to surrender can head to the main assembly areas. I won't judge. But anyone who wants to fight back, follow me. I can't promise we'll survive. I can't even promise we'll make a difference. But I'll be damned if I let these bastards take this ship without making them regret it. She expected argument, hesitation. Instead, Taman nodded sharply and began shutting down his console. Tell me what you need. Portable power cells. Welding equipment. Any weapons we can find. Medical supplies. And anyone who knows how to move quietly. The others were already moving, gathering equipment with the efficiency of people who had made their choice. Hana pulled up the tunnel access map and began planning routes, her fingers steady despite the fear singing through her veins. 1 minute. The ship shuddered as something massive clamped against the hull. Boarding clamps. The Ravagers were coming. Hana closed her eyes for just a second, centering herself. Then she opened them and looked at the small group that had chosen to follow an unranked maintenance technician into what might be the last decision any of them ever made. All right, she said. Let's give them hell. The lights went out entirely as the Ravagers cut the power, plunging Engineering Bay 2 into darkness broken only by emergency phosphorescence. In that darkness, Hana led her small team toward the access hatch that would take them into the veins of the ship. Above them, throughout the meridian dawn, the sound of breaching charges and forced entry echoed through the corridors. The Ravagers were flooding in expecting easy prey, a ship full of defeated survivors ready to be processed or eliminated. What they didn't expect was the invisible network of tunnels beneath their feet. And they certainly didn't expect the angry human maintenance technician who knew every inch of them, who had spent 6 months being overlooked and underestimated, and who had finally found something worth fighting for. The nobody was about to become very dangerous indeed. The maintenance tunnel was barely wide enough for Hana to move through on hands and knees, but it felt like sanctuary after the chaos of the engineering bay. Behind her, 7 crew members followed in single file, their breathing harsh in the confined space. The sounds of the Ravagers above them filtered through the metal, distant shouts and the clang of heavy boots on deck plating. Hana's headlamp cut through the darkness, illuminating junction boxes and conduit runs that she'd serviced 100 times before. Now each one represented opportunity, possibility, a weapon if she was creative enough. She paused at an intersection where 3 tunnels branched off, pulling up her datapad to check the ship's status. The screen flickered with damage reports that made her chest tighten. Sections 9 through 12 were completely depressurized. The medical bay had been seized. The Ravagers were moving methodically through the ship, deck by deck, herding survivors toward what seemed to be collection points. Taman crawled up beside her, his face smudged with grime. What's our objective here, Hana? We're not soldiers. We don't have weapons. What are we actually trying to accomplish? It was a fair question. Hana had led them into the tunnels on instinct and anger. But instinct wasn't a strategy. She looked back at the others. The young Kryn technician whose name she realized she didn't even know. The 2 human engineers, Hyun and Mira. The elderly Chitara, Kelzar, who had fought in actual combat decades ago but was now just trying to survive one more crisis. We slow them down, Hana said, thinking out loud as she spoke. We make them work for every inch. We buy time for any survivors to hide, for any systems to be secured, and we look for opportunities. Opportunities for what? I don't know yet. Hana studied the schematic on her datapad. But the Ravagers don't know this ship. They're treating it like a standard coalition vessel. That's their first mistake. Kelzar clicked his mandibles thoughtfully. The human is correct. They will secure obvious targets, bridge engineering, armory, communications. They follow doctrine. So we hit them where they're not looking. Hana zoomed in on a section of the ship near the cargo bays. There, Deck 4, Section 6. It's a major power junction that feeds their primary containment area. If we could cut it, we'd plunge half their operation into darkness. And then what? Hyun asked. We're still outnumbered 50-1. Then we do it again. And again. We become a problem they can't ignore but can't find. Hana looked at each of them in turn. Look, I won't lie. This is insane. We're maintenance crew playing resistance fighters, but we're the only ones in position to do anything at all. If we do nothing, everyone on this ship dies or wishes they had. Mira nodded slowly. I'm in. Tell me what to do. The others murmured agreement. Even Hyun, despite his doubts, straightened with renewed determination. They were scared, all of them, but they were also angry. The Ravagers had attacked without provocation, murdered their crewmates, and turned their home into a war zone. That deserved a response. Hana led them through the tunnel network, navigating by memory and occasional reference to her datapad. The maintenance system was a three-dimensional maze that most crew members had never needed to see. It wrapped around the ship's major components like a circulatory system, providing access to every critical system. Down here they could move unseen, appearing anywhere on the ship they chose. They reached the power junction after 20 minutes of crawling. Hana could hear Ravagers in the corridor above them, harsh voices barking orders in their guttural language. She held up a fist and the team froze. Through a ventilation grate she could see shadows moving. 3 Ravagers, hulking figures in powered armor that made them look even more massive than their already considerable size. They were dragging a group of crew members toward one of the containment areas, weapons trained on the prisoners. Hana recognized one of the prisoners. Yuna, the human medical officer who had treated Hana's sprained wrist 2 months ago. She was supporting a wounded Kryn officer, her face set in determined calm despite the weapon pointed at her spine. Rage flared in Hana's chest, hot and clarifying. She forced it down, channeling it into focus. Emotion wouldn't help. Precision would. She examined the junction box, identifying the primary conduits that fed power to this section. The system was elegantly designed, with multiple redundancies and failsafes. Normally that was good engineering. Right now it was an obstacle. Taemin appeared at her shoulder, reading her intent. If you cut those 3 conduits, you'll take out power to sections 4 through 7. That's where most of their prisoners are being held. I know. Darkness creates opportunity. Maybe some people can escape in the confusion. Or maybe the Ravagers start executing hostages. Hana met his eyes. They're going to execute them anyway. You know that. Taemin looked away but didn't argue. They both knew the Ravagers' reputation. Hana pulled her cutting torch from her toolkit, adjusting it to a low, focused flame. She worked quickly but carefully, severing each conduit in sequence. The connections sparked and died, and somewhere above them the lights went out, shouts of alarm. The heavy thud of armored feet running, weapons fire brief and sharp, followed by more shouting. In the darkness something was happening. Something chaotic. Move, Hana whispered, and led the team deeper into the tunnels before the Ravagers could organize a response. They relocated to a different section, emerging in a monitoring station that had been abandoned during the initial attack. Hana brought up what remained of the ship's sensor network, piecing together a picture of the situation. It wasn't good. The Ravagers controlled nearly 80% of the ship. Captain Vexithar and the surviving senior officers were imprisoned in what used to be the conference room. The main armory had been seized, along with all the weapons that might have made organized resistance possible. But her sabotage had worked. In the section she'd darkened, chaos had erupted. Prisoners had scattered. Some had been recaptured, but others had vanished into the ship's labyrinth of corridors and storage spaces. The Ravagers were now dedicating forces to searching for escapees instead of consolidating their control. It worked, Mira said, wonder in her voice. It actually worked. Once, Kelzar cautioned. They will adapt. They will expect more sabotage now. Good, Hana said. Let them waste energy looking over their shoulders. She studied the schematic, mind racing through possibilities. The Ravagers had made the conference room their command center, probably because it had intact communication systems. If she could access the environmental controls for that section, she could make them very uncomfortable. Or the life support systems. Or the gravity plating. The ship was full of systems that could be weaponized by someone who knew how to access them. Over the next 3 hours, Hana's team became ghosts. They appeared in unexpected places, struck quickly, and vanished before the Ravagers could respond. They sealed blast doors, trapping raider squads in dead-end corridors. They redirected ventilation to flood sections with non-lethal but incapacitating gas. They accessed the intercom system and broadcast false orders that sent Ravager units running in wrong directions. It was guerrilla warfare conducted through infrastructure, and Hana discovered she had a talent for it. Every system she'd ever repaired, every maintenance log she'd filed, every shortcut she'd discovered while crawling through these tunnels had prepared her for this. But it wasn't without cost. The Ravagers caught on quickly. They began posting guards at access points. They started cutting through junction boxes, destroying the very systems Hana was using against them. And they were getting angry. The team was hiding in a sealed storage compartment, catching their breath and reviewing their next move. When Taemin picked up a communication broadcast from the Ravager command center, the leader's voice was cold with fury. "Attention, surviving crew of the Meridian Dawn. Your resistance is futile and costly. For every act of sabotage, we will execute 3 prisoners. You have accomplished nothing except ensuring more of your companions die. Surrender yourselves immediately or watch them suffer for your defiance." The storage compartment fell silent. Hana felt the weight of those words settle on her shoulders like physical mass. 3 prisoners, for every action she took. The mathematics of atrocity. "We have to stop," Hyun said quietly. "We can't be responsible for executions." "They're bluffing," Mira countered, but her voice lacked conviction. Hana closed her eyes, thinking. Were they bluffing? Probably not. The Ravagers had proven themselves ruthless in every previous encounter. They would absolutely execute prisoners to break resistance, but if Hana's team stopped fighting, everyone would die anyway. That was the certainty. The Ravagers didn't take prisoners long-term. Once they extracted whatever information or resources they wanted, they'd eliminate witnesses and move on. The question wasn't whether people would die. The question was whether they'd die passively or fighting back. Hana opened her eyes and looked at her small, exhausted team. "I won't order anyone to continue. If you want to surrender, I understand. But I'm not stopping. Because right now, we're the only thing slowing them down. We're the only reason any prisoners escaped in the darkness. We're the only hope this ship has." "Hope for what?" Hyun asked bitterly. "We can't win. We're buying time for nothing. Maybe, but I'd rather die making them regret attacking us than die on my knees." It was Kelzar who spoke next, his aged voice carrying the weight of experience. "In my species' history, there was a saying. The swarm that fights in darkness cannot be crushed. Small acts of resistance compound. They create doubt, fear, exhaustion in the enemy. The young human understands this instinctively." Taemin nodded slowly. "We keep going, but we need to be smarter. We need a real objective, not just harassment." "Agreed." Hana pulled up the schematic again, looking at it with fresh perspective. What was the real objective? How could 7 maintenance technicians actually hurt the Ravagers badly enough to matter? Her eyes fell on the ship's communications array. The Ravagers had damaged it in the initial attack, but the core systems were still intact. If she could reach it, restore it, send a distress signal, coalition reinforcements were at least 6 hours away at best speed. But 6 hours was better than never. "There," she said, pointing to a section on the upper decks. "The communications array. If we can restore it and broadcast a distress signal, we might get reinforcements. It's a long shot, but it's better than anything else we've got." The others gathered around to study the schematic. The communications array was on Deck 2 near the bridge, deep in Ravager-controlled territory. Getting there would mean traversing nearly half the ship through maintenance tunnels that were increasingly being monitored. "That's suicide," Hyun said flatly. "Probably," Hana agreed, "but it's suicide with a purpose." Mira traced a route on the datapad. There's a maintenance shaft that runs almost directly to it. Narrow but accessible. The problem is the last 50 meters. We'd be exposed moving through corridors the Ravagers definitely control. Then we create a distraction. Hana's mind was already racing ahead, planning. Something big enough to pull their attention away. We split up. Most of us create chaos on the lower decks. A small team uses that window to reach communications. "Who goes where?" Taemin asked. Hana looked at him. "You're the best engineer. You know the communication systems. You need to be on the team that reaches the array. And you're coming with me because you know these tunnels better than anyone." "No." Hana shook her head. I'm leading the distraction team. You'll take Kelzar. He fought in combat before. He can protect you if things go wrong. Taman started to protest, but Kelzar clicked agreement. The human female is correct. I am old, but I remember how to kill if necessary, and the communications equipment will require delicate work. You need the engineer, not the warrior. It was decided then. Taman and Kelzar would make for the communications array. Hana would take the remaining 5 crew members and create enough chaos to buy them time. They prepared for what might be their last action. Shared equipment, checked life support readings. Hana sent a brief message to her sister through the emergency beacon system, not knowing if it would ever be received. Just 3 words that summed up everything she felt. I love you. Then they moved. Hana led her distraction team to the engineering section, where she had a plan that was either brilliant or insane. The ship's secondary reactor was operating at minimal capacity, held in check by automated safety systems. If those systems were manually overridden, the reactor would surge, triggering alarms and emergency protocols throughout the ship. It wouldn't explode. The fail-safes were too robust for that. But it would look catastrophic on every monitoring system the Ravagers were watching. She reached the reactor control room through a maintenance hatch, dropping silently into the darkened space. The others followed, spreading out to cover the entrances. Hana accessed the reactor controls, her fingers flying over the interface. She'd done maintenance on these systems dozens of times, but never anything like what she was attempting now. Override Safety Protocol 1. Disable automated shutdown. Increase coolant pressure. Push the system right to the edge of critical, without crossing into actual disaster. The reactor began to hum, a rising tone that vibrated through the deck plating. On the monitoring systems, warning indicators lit up like a constellation. Temperature rising, pressure increasing, containment field fluctuating. Above them, alarms shrieked. Emergency protocols activated. And then, exactly as Hana had hoped, she heard the thunder of boots as Ravager forces rushed toward the engineering section, believing the ship's reactor was about to breach. Move, she ordered her team, and they retreated back into the tunnels, sealing the access hatch behind them. Through the ventilation system, Hana could hear the chaos her false emergency had created. Ravagers shouting orders, technical crews scrambling to assess the reactor, officers demanding status reports. It was beautiful, coordinated panic. She hoped it was enough. Somewhere above them, Taman and Kelzar were making their approach to the communications array, counting on this distraction to clear their path. Minutes passed like hours. Hana led her team through the tunnels, staying mobile, always ready to create another crisis if the Ravagers started to recover their composure. She vented atmosphere in an unoccupied cargo bay. She triggered fire suppression systems in the wrong sections. She kept them off balance, confused, reactive. Then, cutting through all the chaos, a single sound that made Hana's heart leap. The ship's communication system coming online. Not the Ravager frequencies. The Coalition emergency channel. And Taman's voice, distorted by static but unmistakable. This is Engineering Officer Taman of the Coalition Starship Meridian Dawn, broadcasting emergency distress on all frequencies. We are under attack by Ravager forces in the Helix Nebula border region. The ship is boarded and partially captured, requesting immediate assistance. Repeat, this is an emergency distress. The transmission cut off abruptly, replaced by weapons fire and shouting. Hana's blood ran cold. They'd been discovered. She was moving before she'd consciously made the decision, scrambling through the maintenance tunnels toward the communications section with her team struggling to keep pace. Deck 4, Deck 3, Deck 2. Climbing ladder after ladder while her arms burned and her breath came in gasps. She emerged from an access panel into absolute chaos. The corridor outside the communications room was a war zone. Bodies on the floor, both Ravager and one that made Hana's vision blur with tears. Kelzar, his chitinous body broken, but he'd taken 3 Ravagers with him. Taman was barricaded inside the communications room, still broadcasting. Hana could see him through the reinforced window, blood streaming from a wound on his shoulder but his hands steady on the controls. 4 Ravagers were trying to force the door, pounding on it with weapons and tools. Hana didn't think. She just acted. She pulled a plasma welder from her toolkit, cranked it to maximum, and drove it into the back of the nearest Ravager's armor. The superheated plasma cut through shielding and flesh, dropping the raider with a scream. The others spun, surprised by the attack from an unexpected angle. Her team burst from the access tunnel behind her. Hyun and Mira, armed with improvised weapons, Metal bars and tools turned into clubs. The young Kryn technician whose name Hana finally heard screamed in battle. Daiho, fighting with the desperate courage of someone with nothing left to lose. It was brutal. Close-quarters fighting that Hana's maintenance training had never prepared her for. She swung her welder like a sword, feeling it connect with armor. She kicked and clawed and refused to go down even when a Ravager's backhand sent her sprawling. The door to the communications room opened, and Taman emerged with a plasma pistol he'd scavenged from somewhere, laying down covering fire that gave the team room to breathe. And then it was over. 4 Ravagers down, Hana's team battered and bleeding but alive. The communications array still broadcasting. Taman looked at Hana, his face pale from blood loss. Message sent. Coalition forces received it. They're 6 hours out. 6 hours. They had to hold for 6 hours. Hana nodded, too exhausted for words. Around them, alarms were still screaming. The Ravagers would be regrouping, preparing to retake this section. 6 hours might as well have been 6 days, but they'd done it. They'd sent the distress call. The Meridian Dawn's position and situation were now known. Help was coming. All they had to do was survive long enough to see it arrive. The communications room became a fortress out of necessity. Hana and her team barricaded the doors with everything they could move: console panels, furniture, even the bodies of fallen Ravagers. It was grim work, but nobody had the luxury of squeamishness. Not anymore. Taman worked to keep the distress beacon active while Mira treated his shoulder wound with supplies from a basic emergency kit. The plasma burn was bad, exposing tissue that would need proper medical attention, but he waved off her concerns and kept his hands on the communications array. If we lose this signal, we lose everything, he said through gritted teeth. Keep broadcasting. Keep telling them we're alive. Hana checked her datapad. The reactor alarm had been silenced as the Ravagers realized it was a false threat, but the damage to their operational efficiency lingered. They were angry now, focused on retaking the communications section. She could track their movements through what remained of the ship's sensor network. 2 squads approaching from the main corridor, another team cutting through bulkheads on the adjacent deck. They were being methodical, learning from their earlier mistakes. No more rushing in blindly. We've got maybe 10 minutes before they... It was Kelzar who spoke next, his aged voice carrying the weight of experience. In my species' history there was a saying: the swarm that fights in darkness cannot be crushed. Small acts of resistance compound. They create doubt, fear, exhaustion in the enemy. The young human understands this instinctively. Taman nodded slowly. We keep going, but we need to be smarter. We need a real objective, not just harassment. Agreed. Hana pulled up the schematic again, looking at it with fresh perspective. What was the real objective? How could 7 maintenance technicians actually hurt the Ravagers badly enough to matter? Her eyes fell on the ship's communications array. The Ravagers had damaged it in the initial attack, but the core systems were still intact. If she could reach it, restore it, send a distress signal, coalition reinforcements were at least 6 hours away at best speed. But 6 hours was better than never. There, she said, pointing to a section on the upper decks. The communications array. If we can restore it and broadcast a distress signal, we might get reinforcements. It's a long shot, but it's better than anything else we've got. The others gathered around to study the schematic. The communications array was on Deck 2 near the bridge, deep in Ravager-controlled territory. Getting there would mean traversing nearly half the ship through maintenance tunnels that were increasingly being monitored. That's suicide, Hyun said flatly. Probably, Hana agreed, but it's suicide with a purpose. Mira traced a route on the datapad. There's a maintenance shaft that runs almost directly to it. Narrow but accessible. The problem is the last 50 meters. We'd be exposed moving through corridors the Ravagers definitely control. Then we create a distraction. Hana's mind was already racing ahead, planning. Something big enough to pull their attention away. We split up. Most of us create chaos on the lower decks. A small team uses that window to reach communications. Who goes where? Taman asked. Hana looked at him. You're the best engineer. You know the communication systems. You need to be on the team that reaches the array. And you're coming with me because you know these tunnels better than anyone. No. Hana shook her head. I'm leading the distraction team. You'll take Kelzar. He fought in combat before. He can protect you if things go wrong. Taman started to protest, but Kelzar clicked agreement. The human female is correct. I am old, but I remember how to kill if necessary, and the communications equipment will require delicate work. You need the engineer, not the warrior. It was decided then. Taman and Kelzar would make for the communications array. Hana would take the remaining 5 crew members and create enough chaos to buy them time. They prepared for what might be their last action. Shared equipment, checked life support readings. Hana sent a brief message to her sister through the emergency beacon system, not knowing if it would ever be received. Just 3 words that summed up everything she felt. I love you. Then they moved. Hana led her distraction team to the engineering section, where she had a plan that was either brilliant or insane. The ship's secondary reactor was operating at minimal capacity, held in check by automated safety systems. If those systems were manually overridden, the reactor would surge, triggering alarms and emergency protocols throughout the ship. It wouldn't explode. The failsafes were too robust for that. But it would look catastrophic on every monitoring system the Ravagers were watching. She reached the reactor control room through a maintenance hatch, dropping silently into the darkened space. The others followed, spreading out to cover the entrances. Hana accessed the reactor controls, her fingers flying over the interface. She'd done maintenance on these systems dozens of times, but never anything like what she was attempting now. Override Safety Protocol 1, disable automated shutdown, increase coolant pressure, push the system right to the edge of critical, without crossing into actual disaster. The reactor began to hum, a rising tone that vibrated through the deck plating. On the monitoring systems, warning indicators lit up like a constellation. Temperature rising, pressure increasing, containment field fluctuating. Above them, alarms shrieked. Emergency protocols activated. And then, exactly as Hana had hoped, she heard the thunder of boots as Ravager forces rushed toward the engineering section, believing the ship's reactor was about to breach. Move, she ordered her team, and they retreated back into the tunnels, sealing the access hatch behind them. Through the ventilation system, Hana could hear the chaos her false emergency had created. Ravagers shouting orders, technical crews scrambling to assess the reactor, officers demanding status reports. It was beautiful, coordinated panic. She hoped it was enough. Somewhere above them, Taman and Kelzar were making their approach to the communications array, counting on this distraction to clear their path. Minutes passed like hours. Hana led her team through the tunnels, staying mobile, always ready to create another crisis if the Ravagers started to recover their composure. She vented atmosphere in an unoccupied cargo bay. She triggered fire suppression systems in the wrong sections. She kept them off balance, confused, reactive. Then, cutting through all the chaos, a single sound that made Hana's heart leap. The ship's communication system coming online. Not the Ravager frequencies. The Coalition emergency channel. And Taman's voice, distorted by static but unmistakable. This is Engineering Officer Taman of the Coalition Starship Meridian Dawn, broadcasting emergency distress on all frequencies. We are under attack by Ravager forces in the Helix Nebula border region. The ship is boarded and partially captured, requesting immediate assistance. Repeat, this is an emergency distress. The transmission cut off abruptly, replaced by weapons fire and shouting. Hana's blood ran cold. They'd been discovered. She was moving before she'd consciously made the decision, scrambling through the maintenance tunnels toward the communications section with her team struggling to keep pace. Deck 4, Deck 3, Deck 2. Climbing ladder after ladder while her arms burned and her breath came in gasps. She emerged from an access panel into absolute chaos. The corridor outside the communications room was a war zone. Bodies on the floor, both Ravager and one that made Hana's vision blur with tears. Kelzar, his chitinous body broken, but he'd taken 3 Ravagers with him. Taman was barricaded inside the communications room, still broadcasting. Hana could see him through the reinforced window, blood streaming from a wound on his shoulder, but his hands steady on the controls. 4 Ravagers were trying to force the door, pounding on it with weapons and tools. Hana didn't think. She just acted. She pulled a plasma welder from her toolkit, cranked it to maximum, and drove it into the back of the nearest Ravager's armor. The superheated plasma cut through shielding and flesh, dropping the raider with a scream. The others spun, surprised by the attack from an unexpected angle. Her team burst from the access tunnel behind her. Hyun and Mira, armed with improvised weapons, metal bars and tools turned into clubs. The young Kryn technician whose name Hana finally heard screamed in battle. Daiho, fighting with the desperate courage of someone with nothing left to lose. It was brutal. Close quarters fighting that Hana's maintenance training had never prepared her for. She swung her welder like a sword, feeling it connect with armor. She kicked and clawed and refused to go down even when a Ravager's backhand sent her sprawling. The door to the communications room opened, and Taman emerged with a plasma pistol he'd scavenged from somewhere, laying down covering fire that gave the team room to breathe. And then it was over. 4 Ravagers down, Hana's team battered and bleeding but alive. The communications array still broadcasting. Taman looked at Hana, his face pale from blood loss. Message sent. Coalition forces received it. They're 6 hours out. 6 hours. They had to hold for 6 hours. Hana nodded, too exhausted for words. Around them, alarms were still screaming. The Ravagers would be regrouping, preparing to retake this section. 6 hours might as well have been 6 days, but they'd done it. They'd sent the distress call. The Meridian Dawn's position and situation were now known. Help was coming. All they had to do was survive long enough to see it arrive. The communications room became a fortress out of necessity. Hana and her team barricaded the doors with everything they could move: console panels, furniture, even the bodies of fallen Ravagers. It was grim work, but nobody had the luxury of squeamishness. Not anymore. Taman worked to keep the distress beacon active while Mira treated his shoulder wound with supplies from a basic emergency kit. The plasma burn was bad, exposing tissue that would need proper medical attention, but he waved off her concerns and kept his hands on the communications array. If we lose this signal, we lose everything, he said through gritted teeth. Keep broadcasting. Keep telling them we're alive. Hana checked her datapad. The reactor alarm had been silenced as the Ravagers realized it was a false threat, but the damage to their operational efficiency lingered. They were angry now, focused on retaking the communications section. She could track their movements through what remained of the ship's sensor network. 2 squads approaching from the main corridor, another team cutting through bulkheads on the adjacent deck. They were being methodical, learning from their earlier mistakes. No more rushing in blindly. We've got maybe 10 minutes before they... She just had to survive long enough to see it. Beside her, Yuna checked her rifle's charge. You know, when I woke up this morning, I thought today would be routine. Minor injuries, maybe a diplomatic headache or two. Never expected to become a resistance fighter. Neither did I. Hana's laugh was raw. I was just a maintenance technician. Nobody important. You saved hundreds of lives today. That sounds pretty important to me. Before Hana could respond, Deho's voice crackled over their improvised communication channel. Movement on Deck 3. They've found our position. Multiple squads converging. Hana straightened, exhaustion falling away as combat clarity took over. Fall back to Position 7. We make our stand there. Position 7 was a reinforced junction point near the ship's central core, chosen for its defensibility and multiple escape routes. If they were going to survive the next 3 hours, it would be from there. They ran through corridors that had become unfamiliar, transformed by battle into alien territory. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew louder. The Ravagers were done being patient. They were coming with everything they had. Hana reached Position 7 and began setting up the last of their defenses. It wasn't much. Barricades made from debris, a few improvised traps, the plasma rifles they'd taken from dead guards, but it would have to be enough. Because 3 hours from now, coalition forces would arrive, and Hana intended to be alive to greet them, no matter what it took. Position 7 was a junction where 3 corridors met at a large intersection near the ship's central power distribution hub. Hana had chosen it because it offered sightlines in multiple directions and access to critical systems that could be weaponized if needed. Now crouched behind a makeshift barricade of overturned cargo containers, she watched the corridors and tried to calculate how long they could possibly hold. The answer was depressing. Maybe 30 minutes if they were lucky. Mira was checking ammunition, her face drawn with exhaustion. Deho stood watch on the left corridor, his Kryn eyesight better suited to the dimmed emergency lighting. Yuna had her plasma rifle ready, but her hands kept drifting to her medical kit, the healer's instinct warring with necessity. They're taking their time, Mira observed. They know we're cornered. Good. Let them be careful. Careful takes time, and time is what we need. Hana pulled up her datapad, checking the countdown she'd started when Taman sent the distress signal. 2 hours and 43 minutes until estimated coalition arrival. An eternity. Movement in the right corridor. Daeho's warning hiss came a split second before the first plasma bolt screamed past Hana's head, scorching the bulkhead behind her. She returned fire, squeezing the trigger in controlled bursts the way Kelzar had shown her in what felt like a lifetime ago, but had been only hours. The Ravagers came in a coordinated rush, 3 from the right, 2 from the left. Professional, efficient, overwhelming. Hana's team laid down suppressing fire, but they were outgunned and everyone knew it. A plasma bolt caught Daeho in the chest, punching through his emergency suit. He went down hard, his rifle clattering away. Yuna screamed and fired wildly. More emotion than aim, but it was enough to force the Ravagers back momentarily. Hana grabbed Daeho and dragged him behind the barricade while Mira covered. His breathing was labored, fluid bubbling in his throat. She'd seen enough injuries in the last few hours to know what that meant. "Yuna," she called, and the medical officer was already there, hands moving with practiced efficiency even as tears streamed down her face. "Collapsed lung. Internal bleeding. I need proper equipment, a surgical bay, not a battlefield." Yuna's voice was steady despite the tears. "I can stabilize him, but he needs real help soon." "Do what you can." Another assault, this time from all 3 corridors simultaneously. The Ravagers had brought up heavier weapons, and the barricade began to disintegrate under sustained fire. Hana felt heat wash over her as a plasma bolt passed close enough to singe her hair. She triggered the trap she'd prepared, overloading a power conduit that ran beneath the central corridor. The explosion wasn't large, but it was loud and bright and unexpected. 2 Ravagers went down and the others fell back to reassess. "That's the last trap," Hana said. "We're out of tricks." Mira's rifle clicked empty. She threw it aside and pulled a welder from her toolkit. The same weapon Hana had used to start this desperate resistance. "Then we fight with what we have." They were going to die here. Hana knew it with cold certainty. They'd bought time, freed prisoners, sent the distress signal. They'd done more than anyone had right to expect from maintenance technicians. But the mathematics of combat were unforgiving and their luck had run out. The Ravagers advanced again, and this time there was nothing to stop them. Hana fired until her rifle overheated, then grabbed Mira's welder and prepared to meet them hand-to-hand if necessary. She'd come too far to surrender now. Then the ship shuddered. Not from weapons fire. Something else. Something massive docking or undocking. The Ravagers hesitated, receiving new orders over their communication systems. Through the chaos, Hana heard it. A sound she'd been praying for. The deep thrumming tone of Coalition warship drives transmitted through the hull. Not in 3 hours now. Her datapad lit up with new sensor data. 3 Coalition destroyers had dropped out of jump space right on top of their position, somehow arriving hours early, and they were angry. The Ravagers' communication channel, which Hana had been monitoring, exploded with panicked orders. "Retreat. Abandon the ship. Get to the boarding craft." The raiders who had been advancing on her position turned and ran, all thoughts of eliminating resistance forgotten in their desperate need to escape. Hana slumped against the barricade, unable to believe what she was seeing. "They're running. They're actually running." Mira started laughing, a slightly hysterical sound. "We did it. We actually did it." "Not yet." Yuna was still working on Daeho, her hands red with his blood. "I need medical support now or we're going to lose him." Hana forced herself to move, to think beyond survival. She accessed the ship's communication system, finding it damaged but functional. "This is Hana of the Meridian Dawn. We have wounded in position 7 Central Junction, Deck 4. Request immediate medical assistance." The response was immediate, a crisp Coalition military voice. "Confirmed, Meridian Dawn. Medical teams are boarding now. Can you provide status of the ship and crew? Ship is partially captured. Approximately 300 survivors scattered throughout the vessel, many wounded. The bridge crew is imprisoned in the conference room. Ravager forces are retreating to their ships, but still dangerous. We need security teams and medical support on every deck." "Understood. Hold your position. Help is coming." And it was. Hana could hear it now. The sounds of Coalition Marines boarding the ship, engaging Ravager forces in firefights throughout the corridors. The tide had turned completely. What had been a doomed ship was now a rescue operation. The first Coalition team reached Position 7 within minutes. Professional soldiers in combat armor, who moved with the confidence of people who knew exactly what they were doing. They secured the junction, established a perimeter, and their medic immediately took over Daeho's care from Yuna. A lieutenant approached Hana. His helmet retracted to show a weathered face. "Are you Hana? The one who sent the distress signal?" "My colleague Taman sent it. I just kept the Ravagers busy while he worked." Hana's voice felt distant, disconnected from her body. "Is he—" Was there anyone alive in the communications room? The lieutenant's expression told her the answer before he spoke. "I'm sorry. When we cleared that section, we found one body. He died defending the communications array. Without that beacon, we wouldn't have found you in time." Hana closed her eyes. Taman, Hyun, Kelzar, dozens of others whose names she'd never learned, all dead so that the rest could live. "The Ravagers tortured him," the lieutenant continued quietly. "Tried to make him shut down the beacon. He refused. Kept broadcasting until the end. That's rare courage, even among soldiers. He was just an engineer," Hana said. "We were all just maintenance crew. Nobody special." "Ma'am, with respect, you held off a Ravager assault force for hours using nothing but maintenance equipment and knowledge of your ship. You freed prisoners, organized resistance, and kept enough survivors alive for rescue to mean something. I've served 20 years in coalition security, and I've rarely seen anything that impressive from trained soldiers, much less civilians." The words felt surreal. Hana looked around at Position 7, at the scorch marks and blood and improvised barricades. It looked like a war zone because that's what it had been, and somehow impossibly they'd survived it. More coalition forces swept through the ship, hunting down the remaining Ravagers and securing each section. Medical teams moved efficiently from survivor to survivor, treating wounds and evacuating the critical cases. The Meridian Dawn was coming back under friendly control, one corridor at a time. Hana found Yuna sitting against a bulkhead, her hands still shaking from adrenaline crash. She sat down beside her, and for a moment, they just breathed together, processing the fact that they were alive. "Daeho?" Hana asked. "Stable. He'll need surgery, but he'll live." Yuna let out a shaky breath. "We all lived. I can't quite believe it." "Not all of us." "No, not all." Yuna's voice was soft. The morning light flooding through the Meridian Dawn's corridors felt like a promise. After hours of emergency lighting and darkness, the return of the day cycle was more than just illumination. It was symbolic, a statement that the ship was coming back to life. Hana stood in the observation deck, watching coalition medical shuttles ferry wounded crew members to the destroyer fleet for proper treatment. The view outside was crowded now, 3 destroyers maintaining protective formation while smaller vessels darted back and forth on rescue missions. It was organized chaos, but it was their chaos, controlled, purposeful, safe. She'd been standing there for 20 minutes, unable to make herself move. The adrenaline that had carried her through the battle had faded, leaving behind exhaustion so profound it felt physical. Every muscle ached. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking, and her mind kept replaying moments from the last 12 hours, unable to process that it was actually over. Footsteps behind her. Hana turned to see Captain Vexthar approaching, his scaled face showing fresh medical dressings. His arm was in a regenerative cast, and he moved with the careful deliberation of someone in pain who refused to show it. "Captain," Hana said, starting to straighten to attention before remembering she was so far beyond protocol at this point that it hardly mattered. "At ease, technician." Vexthar's voice carried the rough warmth of someone who'd survived something they shouldn't have, though I suspect that rank will be changing soon enough. He joined her at the observation window, both of them looking out at the rescue operation in silence for a moment. "I owe you an apology," the captain said finally. "For 6 months you worked on my ship, keeping critical systems running, and I never once learned your name. You were invisible to me, just another technician doing necessary but unremarkable work. That was my failure as a commander. You had 800 crew members, sir. You can't know everyone, perhaps not, but I should have known the people who made my ship function. The ones in the maintenance tunnels and engine rooms doing the work that kept us all alive." He turned to look at her directly. "You saved the ship, Hana, not me. Not my officers. You and a handful of maintenance crew who refused to give up. We just did what we could, what we had to. That's what makes it remarkable." Vexthar's expression was difficult to read, his reptilian features not translating human emotions well, but his tone carried genuine respect. "Trained soldiers do what they're supposed to do. You did what nobody expected, with tools nobody considered weapons, using knowledge nobody valued. That's not just survival. That's innovation under impossible pressure. Hana didn't know how to respond to that. She looked back out at the stars, at the coalition ships that represented safety and order, everything the Ravagers had tried to destroy. "I've been speaking with Colonel Serix," the captain continued. "Coalition Command wants a full report on your actions. They're calling it a textbook example of asymmetric resistance. There's talk of incorporating your tactics into security training for all Coalition vessels." My tactics were making things up as I went along. The best tactics often are. A hint of what might have been a smile crossed his features. "But beyond the tactical analysis, there's something else. The crew members you saved, the ones who scattered when you freed them from that cargo bay, they're telling everyone what you did. How you appeared from nowhere to fight Ravagers twice your size. How you used the ship itself as a weapon. You're becoming something of a legend, technician. Or should I say war hero?" The word made Hana uncomfortable. "I'm not a hero. I'm just someone who didn't want to die quietly." "That's what heroes always say." Vexthar shifted his weight, favoring his injured side. "But regardless of how you see yourself, the galaxy is going to see you differently now. The maintenance technician who saved 800 lives and held off a Ravager assault force with nothing but wits and maintenance tools. That story is spreading through the Coalition already. By tomorrow, every news service in Allied space will be covering it." Hana felt a flutter of panic in her chest. She didn't want fame or attention. She'd been content being invisible, doing her job, living her life without scrutiny. As if reading her thoughts, Vexthar continued. "I know this isn't what you wanted, but sometimes what we do chooses us, not the other way around. You'll never be invisible again, Hana. The question is what you do with that visibility." Before Hana could respond, Yuna appeared in the observation deck, looking as exhausted as Hana felt, but with something like peace in her expression. "There you are. They're asking for you in the medical bay. Nothing urgent, just want to make sure you're not injured beyond what the adrenaline is hiding." "I'm fine." "You're covered in blood, some of which is probably yours, and you've been awake for 18 hours in combat conditions. You're not fine. You're functional. There's a difference." Yuna's medical authority came through despite her gentle tone. "Come on, let them check you over." Hana nodded and followed, pausing at the doorway to look back at Captain Vexthar. "Sir, about the crew members who didn't make it. Taemin, Kelzar, Hyun. They deserve recognition too. They fought just as hard. They'll get it. I'm personally recommending all of them for the Coalition Star of Valor, posthumously. Their families will know what they did." The captain's voice was solemn. "The galaxy doesn't often see this kind of courage. When it does, we honor it." The medical bay was controlled chaos, with doctors and nurses from the rescue fleet working alongside the Meridian Dawn's surviving medical staff. Deho was there, sedated and stable, his chest wrapped in regenerative bandaging. Mira sat in a corner, letting a medic clean and dress a burn on her arm that she hadn't mentioned during the fighting. A human doctor, maybe 40 with kind eyes and efficient hands, directed Hana to a medical scanner. "Let's see what you've done to yourself. Any pain anywhere specific?" "Everywhere, generally." The doctor smiled at that. "Sounds about right. Let the scanner do its work." The medical scan revealed what Hana had suspected. Bruised ribs, a partially dislocated shoulder, dozens of minor burns and cuts, dehydration and exhaustion profound enough to be dangerous. Nothing life-threatening, but enough that the doctor insisted on treatment and rest. "You're going to hurt for a while," the doctor said, applying regenerative gel to the worst of her burns. "But you'll heal. Physically, anyway. The psychological effects of what you experienced, that's going to take longer. I'm flagging you for counseling when we get back to Coalition space." "I'm fine." "Nobody who went through what you did is fine. That's not weakness, it's biology. Your body flooded you with chemicals to survive combat, and now you're crashing. It's normal, but it needs to be managed." The doctor's tone was firm but compassionate. "You don't have to be strong right now, Hana. You've been strong enough. Let someone help you." Maybe it was the exhaustion, or the medical gel making her pain recede, or just the simple kindness in the doctor's voice. But Hana felt something break inside her, the shell of control she'd been maintaining cracking open. Tears came suddenly, unexpectedly, and she couldn't stop them. The doctor didn't say anything, just kept working, giving Hana space to fall apart in the safety of the medical bay. After months of being invisible, after hours of being the strong one who had to have answers, she could finally just be human. Scared and tired and grieving, Yuna appeared beside her, not speaking, just being present. Then Mira joined them, the three survivors of their small resistance sitting together while the medical bay hummed with activity around them. Eventually, the tears stopped. Hana wiped her face, embarrassed but also oddly relieved. "Sorry, I don't usually—" "Don't apologize for being alive," Mira said quietly. "We earned these tears." The doctor finished treatment and prescribed rest, but Hana knew sleep would be difficult. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the corridors, heard the weapons fire, felt the terror of thinking she was about to die. She wandered through the ship instead, observing the cleanup and repair operations. Coalition engineers were assessing damage. Security teams were ensuring every section was clear, and survivors were beginning the process of recovering their belongings and reclaiming their spaces. In the human quarters, Hana found her cabin exactly as she'd left it before the attack. Her datapad on the bunk, her sister's messages still unread, her uniform locker still open from when she'd grabbed her emergency suit. It felt like looking at a museum display of someone else's life. The person who had slept in this bunk yesterday morning was gone. Transformed by violence and necessity into someone different, someone the galaxy was calling a hero, Hana sat on the bunk and finally read her sister's messages. Birthday party pictures. Questions about when she'd visit. Normal life continuing on Earth without any knowledge of what Hana had just survived. She started typing a response, then stopped, unsure how to summarize the last 12 hours in a way that wouldn't terrify her family. Instead, she sent a simple message. "I'm alive. I'm okay. I'll call soon. I love you." The ship's communication system activated, Colonel Sarex's voice carrying through the corridors. "Attention all personnel. The Meridian Dawn is now secure. All Ravager forces have been eliminated or have fled the system. Casualty count is still being compiled, but preliminary reports indicate approximately 270 crew members survived, with another 80 in critical condition but stable. For a ship that was completely boarded and captured, these numbers represent an extraordinary survival rate. I want every person who resisted, who hid, who helped others, to know that your actions saved lives. The Coalition is proud of you all. 270 survivors out of 800. It felt simultaneously like a miracle and a tragedy. So many dead, but so many more alive than would have been without the resistance. Hana left her cabin and made her way to the communications room where Taman had made his final stand. Coalition security had cleared it, documented it, removed his body for proper honors. Now it was just an empty room with scorched walls and dried blood on the floor. She stood in the doorway, remembering his steady hands on the controls, his determination to keep broadcasting no matter what. He'd been her friend, her colleague, just an engineer who wanted to make a difference. "He was brave," a voice said behind her. Commander Thulos, moving awkwardly on his remaining legs with the assistance of a mechanical support frame. "I knew Taman for 3 years. Quiet, thoughtful, never sought attention. I would not have predicted he would die a hero's death. But perhaps that is the nature of true courage. It lives in unexpected places. He wasn't trying to be heroic. He was just trying to help. That is what makes it heroic." Thulos clicked thoughtfully. "You know, in Chitara culture, we have a concept, Kelrith. It translates roughly to the strength found in necessity. When circumstance demands more than you believe you can give, and yet you give it anyway. That is what I witnessed today. Kelrith and every member of your resistance team. We were just maintenance crew. You were what the situation needed you to be. That is the definition of adaptability, a trait humans are known for throughout the Coalition." The commander studied her with his compound eyes. "I have recommended you for promotion to Engineering Officer 2nd Class, with commendations for tactical thinking and leadership under combat conditions." Captain Vexthar agrees. "The Coalition will likely add their own recognition." Hana shook her head. "I don't want promotions or recognition. I just want things to go back to normal." "There is no going back, only forward." Thulos turned to leave, then paused. "For what it is worth, technician, you have my gratitude. My life and many others continue because you refuse to accept defeat. That is a debt that cannot be repaid." Alone again in the communications room, Hana let herself remember the fear, the desperate plans, the moment when she decided to fight instead of hide. It hadn't felt noble or heroic at the time. It had felt like the only option available. Maybe that was what heroism actually was. Not some grand gesture or fearless charge, but simply refusing to quit when quitting would be easier. She left the communications room and made her way to the observation deck one more time. The morning cycle had fully brightened now, the artificial sun at its zenith. Through the windows, she could see coalition vessels beginning to organize for the journey back to Allied space. The Meridian Dawn would be towed to a repair facility, assessed rebuilt if possible, and Hana would go with it. No longer invisible, no longer just a maintenance technician nobody noticed. The galaxy knew her name now. Her story would be told in coalition briefings, studied in military academies, referenced in discussions about ship security and crew training. From nobody to Notorious in 12 hours, she thought about Taemin's last words to her. Hold for 6 hours and we win. They'd done it. They'd held. They'd won, at a terrible cost, but they'd won. The observation deck door opened and survivors began filtering in, drawn to the windows and the view of safety represented by the coalition fleet. They nodded to Hana as they passed, some offering quiet thanks, others just meeting her eyes with understanding. They were all survivors now, bound by shared trauma and the knowledge that they'd faced the worst and endured. Yuna and Mira found her again, flanking her on either side at the observation window, the three of them battered and exhausted and alive, watching the dawn together. What happens now? Mira asked. Hana thought about that, about her cabin full of someone else's life, about the promotion and recognition she didn't want, about the invisible infrastructure of the ship that had saved them all, about being seen when she'd spent so long being overlooked. I don't know, she admitted, but we survived to find out. That's something. It would have to be enough. The morning had come after the longest night of their lives. Whatever came next, they would face it the same way they'd faced the Ravagers, together, with whatever tools they had, refusing to give up. The nobody had become Notorious, and the war hero had begun her story in maintenance tunnels nobody valued, using knowledge nobody respected, defending people nobody expected her to save. And as the morning light filled the observation deck, Hana allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. She'd done what needed doing. She'd kept her people alive. She'd turned invisibility into strength and underestimation into advantage. The Meridian Dawn would sail again, and when it did, everyone aboard would remember the morning a maintenance technician became a legend, not through power or position, but through simple, stubborn refusal to let the darkness win. That was the human way. That was her way. And the galaxy was finally paying attention.